Good morning. My name is Kristan Vasquez, and I serve as the Chief Operating Officer for Ascension, Texas. I am honored this morning to welcome you today to the final 2020-2021 Engage series, an informed discussion about the economic impact of COVID-19 and Winter Storm Uri. The emergence of the novel coronavirus earlier this year presented the world with an unprecedented challenge. Not since the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918 have we faced such a daunting public health crisis. By late February of 2020, it was clear our healthcare systems, government, and every American citizen would need to work together to conquer this invisible enemy. Throughout this pandemic, we have found inspiration in witnessing the incredible and selfless work of caregivers at the front line in all of our health systems and across the entire country. The doctors, the nurses, the facility management teams, and other support teams in our hospitals and clinics have given everything they have to meet the needs of Central Texas community. These heroes are the embodiment of Ascension, Texas. Mission to serve. A year later, in February 2021, Winter Storm Uri swept across Central Texas. For more than 5 days, our community experienced record cold temperatures and power outages that significantly impacted our day-to-day lives. Millions of Texans went without power and without water in some cases during sub-freezing temperatures. At Ascension Seton hospitals and healthcare facilities, the weather condition caused some significant challenges for us as well. Throughout the pandemic and Winter Storm Uri, the bright spot was we witnessed an incredible outpouring of support as our community began coordinating disaster relief services and finding ways to help each other. We appreciate the efforts of local businesses, institutions, governments, and schools that developed and implemented mitigation strategies. Today, we will hear from some experts who are still trying to assess the economic cost of the pandemic and the winter storm in our region. As Greater Austin continues to open up and we explore the next phase of recovery, we are now at a place where we can pinpoint the lessons we learned, outline our long-term interventions, and explore intentional ways to reduce economic inequality gaps that we saw grow during this past year. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm excited to welcome our esteemed speakers.
Hi, everyone. My name is Courtney Bailey, and I'm the Director of Issues and Engagement at Leadership Austin. I want to thank Kristan Vasquez, Chief Operating Officer at Ascension Seton, Texas, for her opening message. And also want to thank you all for joining us today on our final Engage panel of this series on economic impact of COVID-19 and Winter Storm Uri. Finally, I want to give a thanks to Judy Maggio for always co-hosting this panel series with me.
I'm so honored to be here. Good morning, everyone. To echo what Courtney said, thank you so much for sharing a little bit of your morning with us today. A quick reminder for anyone watching on Facebook, we would like for you to be part of this conversation. You can send in a question, just type them right there in the comment section, and we'll get to as many questions as possible today. Also, you may have noticed from our marketing materials that Tracy McDaniels, president of TIP Strategies, was slated to join us this morning. Sadly, Tracy had a death in the family and she is unable to be here today.
And Tracy, our thoughts are with you and your family during this time. So now I'd like to introduce the rest of our panelists joining us this morning. First, we have Veronica Briceño, Chief Economic Recovery Officer for the City of Austin Economic Development Department. Next, we have Laura Huffman, President and CEO of the Greater Austin Chamber of Commerce. And finally, we have Ahmed Moladina, Chairman of the Board for the Greater Austin Asian Chamber of Commerce, and also President and CEO of Soul Technologies. Welcome, everyone. So let's get into the first question. Now, I'm going to warn you, I'm about to put you on the spot. But I'm curious as to What are your thoughts about the city and businesses opening back up after 14 plus months of isolation? And I'm going to start with Ahmed.
Thank you, Courtney. So I feel that there's still a lot to be done in terms of recovery, but are we ready yet? I think the city has been doing a fantastic job. The county's been doing a fantastic job at vaccinating a lot of people. There's still quite a few that are still out there that haven't been. And so we just need to be sure of what we're getting into and what people are coming back as they come back. But I think we're ready. We're ready for this. We're ready for the businesses to open back. Absolutely. Love it.
Thank you, Ahmed. Laura?
I think that we are ready, and I think that what's happening in Austin is following science and good information on what a safe reopening looks like. By the way, as of Monday, we're just under 70% of people that had at least one vaccine. So we're ahead of the national averages. So this is a community that values community and being together. And I think that our high vaccination rates are an indication that people are willing to do what it takes. Not just for the businesses to reopen, but if you look at any social media now, it's so clear that people are just joyously re-engaging with friends and with colleagues. And I think it's something to be celebrated, and I think we can do it safely.
Thank you, Laura. Veronica?
I do think that we're ready, and we're really excited about this next period of time for our city. Public health is economic health, so it is important that we put public health, and we have led in that direction over the past year, but we need to continue to do so. At the city, we're continuously communicating with our business community at atxrecovers.com, and I believe that's going to go out in the chat. As we progress, we want to make sure that we're communicating the latest and greatest to our community. We also know that businesses and civic organizations can request a mobile vaccine visit from the state. There's a number, 844-90-TEXAS, that entities can call and schedule that. And that's really helpful as employers are having employees come back into the workplace and so forth. And then finally, I think what's important for us and unique to us in the city of Austin is we are the live music capital of the world. And live music certainly took a hit this past year. And it's so exciting to see our live music venues come online, having more opportunities to celebrate in that. In fact, we were recognized nationally recently in a Rolling Stone article about the importance of the live music industry here in Austin and how it is exciting that it's coming back online. So we look forward to continued economic health.
Veronica, I want to dig a little bit deeper with the city of Austin, because we know the economic and social disruption caused by the pandemic has really been devastating and traumatic for so many people. As a city of Austin employee, give us your perspective. What do you think Austin's really done right? And where do you see some areas where we could have responded in a bigger and better way?
I have a lot of pride in how our city responded. If you had told me 2 years ago that our department would have launched 12 brand new programs in less than a year and released over $115 million in relief funds to our community, I would have said that's impossible, having worked at the city for over 20 years. But we did it. Our workforce really stood up to the call to help. The employees in our economic development department, they work directly with our small business owners, with our artists, with our musicians. And so when the pandemic started, they felt this as an individual and really felt honored to be able to be part of the solution. So I think that leading with empathy and that leading with understanding of our community and really listening, whether it was one-on-one, somebody calling and frankly crying about how devastating this was, to listening on the broader group and focus groups and organizations like the Chambers of Commerce, making sure that we really listened is important to how we approached recovery. With anything, hindsight's 2020, and I think we did the best we could in a year where we ourselves were dealing with a pandemic and the realities of that. But we are sitting down and taking some time to do grows and glows and what can we do better the next time around, whether it's a health pandemic or another emergency, the winter storm, for example. And so we're looking at how can we do things like really streamline communications, making sure that when we go into this emergency time that we are there as a city communicating openly with our business community, with our arts and our music community, making sure that that infrastructure is in place so we're ready to roll when that happens the next time.
Veronica, I appreciate you saying leading with empathy, understanding, and listening. We need more of that. Thank you for that. Laura, this next question is for you. A University of Texas study showed small businesses in Austin continue to be hit hard with revenue down 37% from pre-pandemic days. What needs to happen to help ensure these small businesses don't close for good?
Well, let me pull the cameras back on that question a little bit, because when the pandemic first started and the city and the county asked the business community to form a coalition and start thinking about how can we strike this balance between public health and between the economy. And Veronica was a part of that, and that ethos of, public health is part of a healthy economy. We all led with that in mind. We knew at the beginning of this economy that our risk was a tale of two cities, and that our small local businesses were being hit harder. There were sectors that were being hit harder. Anybody associated with entertainment, industry, tourism. So not only were the small businesses, but some sector specific businesses were getting hit very, very hard. We learned over that period of time that there were actually some businesses in Austin that did quite well during the pandemic. It didn't hit everybody evenly. And in fact, we had the strongest year ever for economic growth in terms of new companies locating to Austin. And so the lesson that we are in the middle of right now is, what can we learn and what must we not leave behind? And I think those small businesses are a part of that story. So what I would say to you is, it's really important for all of us to support those small businesses. There are programs in
I think you froze, Laura. There you go. Now you're back. Now you're back. Continue.
The number one thing we can do is to help these businesses by getting in there and being good customers to them.
That's so important, to support our local businesses, and we see them as our neighbors and around town. So as Laura mentioned, do your best to support those folks. It's been a really rough go. The big companies have done well. Some of the smaller ones have not. Ahmed, I have a question for you when we're talking about businesses. The Greater Austin Asian Chamber has made a direct call to our community to support Asian American businesses in particular, because that really means you're supporting Asian communities. What industries, from your perspective, have been impacted the most this past year? And do you see them making a full recovery anytime soon?
Great question, Judy. So Laura mentioned some of the industries such as hospitality, travel, and there are several more. But really most of the smaller businesses. We did the Austin Asian Chamber did a study with UT Austin, and here are some of the facts that we found. That 89% of Asian businesses, and this is in Austin, of all types, are experiencing revenue losses. Out of that 89%, 39% have experienced losses over 50%, and 45% of our businesses have had to furlough or lay off employees. And 65% of these businesses did not apply for government aid because they did not understand how to apply. But with all of that being said, a lot of the small businesses, as we've discussed, did get affected, and they are primarily in the retail space, whether it be restaurants, whether it be hospitality, hotels. All of these got affected. There are some others as well, but the bigger ones obviously did better. There are some that were 40 years old, 30 years old, and they had to shut down, unfortunately. And that's the unfortunate part. But life goes on, but we do need to support our businesses, local businesses.
Thank you, Ahmed, for those stats. That's really helpful. So this next question is for everyone, or anyone who would like to share. So in addition to the pandemic, as we mentioned, we've been hit with extreme weather, which is happening more often. Can you tell us, how do you think the winter storm impacted our Texas economy? And do you see any long-term effects, and how can we better prepare next time? Since Veronica, you touched on that, I'm gonna go with Laura or Ahmed, but one of you like to start?
Sure. Well, there were huge impacts to the Texas economy. I mean, there were impacts to homeowners, to community members to businesses. I know businesses that are still not back fully up and running because of damage that occurred while the electricity was out. I think there's a ton of lessons to be learned in all of that. Texas has always been known for having a really strong independent grid. It's been viewed as an asset. And now we need to rethink what that means. There were some very real ramifications. The fact that some of our chip manufacturers were shut down is part of the chip shortage that we're going to be seeing globally. If you were listening to the news today, there were some stories around this, but it might be harder to find a refrigerator or an appliance that requires a computer chip. And that winter storm is part of why those chips are going to be delayed. So I think there were some very real impacts to our community. I think that I think we're getting a lot of I think we're learning a lot about our resilience as a community. I think anything we can do to pay attention to our economic and just sort of our social and cultural resilience, we just have to be thinking more deeply about that. I'll give you two examples from the pandemic that I think are important. We didn't used to think about childcare as part of our basic infrastructure. Well, we need to. We've known about the digital divide, but we need to think a lot harder about that now. And a third one would be, we know.
I think she'll come back on in a second. If not, Ahmed, you can jump in.
Yeah, why don't you go and jump in, Ahmed, while we unfreeze Laura and she can finish her thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that that week of the storm, we lost a ton of productivity. We lost a ton of resources. If we look around in the city of Austin, we've lost a lot of green space, in my opinion, right? We've had to replace a lot of trees and shrubs and so forth from an individual perspective. From a business perspective, businesses were shut down for an entire week or longer and then had to recover from that, whether it be from repairs or electricity or whatever that might be. But there's a substantial amount of damage that was done to our businesses, from roofs leaking to roofs being replaced, carpets, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's, again, a lot of infrastructure that needed to be changed. And then, going back to our grid and our water, the infrastructure, as Laura mentioned, the childcare being one of them. I mean, we need to consider all of those different components and see how important each one of them is really to us.
Veronica, I know you touched on this in your past answer. Do you want to add anything about, long-term effects and how we can be better prepared next time around?
I would add one thing that we saw uniquely at the city this time around. I think the city's done a really good job of emergency responses overall, but usually the emergency is happening somewhere else. We're the shelter for evacuees from a hurricane or from some sort of natural disaster in another part of our country. And here we had a situation where we as city employees were also being impacted by the situation. I was one of the houses that did not have electricity for that full time, and having to be responding and assisting our community at a time where we're struggling ourselves was a hugely different experience, and really gave thought to, at least for me personally, and I'm sure my peers as well, how are we better equipped next time to be both in survival mode ourselves and responding to our community?
Sure, it's hard to you need to put that oxygen mask on first before you can put it on the passenger, right? So you guys were dealing with the same types of emergencies that everyone else was in the community. Very good point. Laura, I think you're back, and there you are. We hope maybe the technical issues have been ironed out. Did you want to add anything else before we head on to the next question?
No, I'll let us keep going.
Okay, let's keep going.
I ended on broadband and access.
Yes, and that's a perfect segue to the next question, because we're going to be talking about the disparities that were exposed both during the pandemic and during the winter storm. It just really magnified a lot of the equity gaps that we are seeing in our community in so many different ways, from the healthcare system to the education system to the economy. So what immediate and long-term systems need to be put in place from your very different perspectives, especially for people of color and historically marginalized communities, so that everyone can better access these recovery resources in the long haul. So who wants to start with that one? Veronica's from a city perspective, communities that have been historically marginalized, how can we better access those recovery resources for those folks?
This was an area that was very important to us as a city. I feel fortunate that our economic development department was one of the first departments in the city of Austin to really do an equity assessment and start that process with our equity office. So we had a team that was already thinking in that space, and I think that went a long way. Some of the things that we did during recovery included things like translating all of our applications and information into 4 languages. We translated everything into Spanish, Chinese, Arabic, and Vietnamese. We did things like have our information be released a week before the program went live so people could really read into it and see what materials they needed. We worked closely with our minority ethnic chambers to really help us get the word out. And then with each of our programs, or most of our programs, I should say, we also enlisted what we called community champions. So organizations in the community that are trusted by our community to really help get the word out and help folks access this relief. I'm proud of the fact that we also were very transparent in what we did. If you look at our website, we have dashboards for every one of our programs that we administered. Could we do better? I think we could always do better, but we really tried to get the word out and make sure that we're reaching communities that need the access or need the relief the most. I would, you also talked about just how fragile really our situation is with our small business community, and not only with communities of color, but also some of our legacy businesses. One of the programs that we administered was a legacy business relief fund. Great program, but a lot of these businesses are the ones that y'all are talking about that we know and love in Austin, and we don't want to go away. And as we started working with them, we realized things like we can provide technical assistance in terms of developing a continuity plan so that we don't lose those businesses at the end of the day. So I think that's also important when we're talking about the fragility of our community.
Laura, I'm sure that you witnessed that fragility among the local businesses that the chamber serves.
Yeah, for certain. And we've talked about where that really was the most impacted, and some of the smaller businesses, the businesses that were closer to those sectors that were impacted. And, I want to echo what Veronica said and then expand on it a little bit. I think it would be a real shame if we as a community didn't take a step back and really think about what we learned, not just anecdotally, but systematically. What do we learn about what is our infrastructure look like? How can we adequately address daycare? What did we learn about transportation? What did we learn? What are we learning right now about the opportunity to provide upskilling and reskilling for people that might be permanently out of work? And, there is, this could almost be definitive of how we're going to grow in the next 10 years, of whether or not we find ways to identify those people that are in jobs that are either being lost.
Uh-oh, looks like we lost you again, Laura. All right.
Can I add, Judy?
Ahmed, let's switch over to you and discuss this access to resources and recovery. We got Laura back.
Okay.
Laura, you want to finish your thought real quick?
You're muted. You're muted.
To learn the lesson, honestly, to find ways to really dig into how we provide training and resources to people for the jobs that are coming to Austin, and that the jobs that are going to define the future economy of Austin. And I think that that's time well spent, and we haven't done a good enough job of that.
Ahmed?
Yeah, I was just gonna add to what Veronica and Laura were talking about. And yes, there's absolutely a lot of resources that are available to everyone from the city's perspective. But we do need to learn from whatever we've gone through, in the sense that, so my company, we do technology and healthcare staffing. And so we staff for a lot of different people, a lot of different companies. And if you see the statistics, a lot of the people that are on the lower scale, pay scale, they don't have access to the resources that a lot of the other people would. As an example, internet access. And so when you want to go get a vaccine, or when you want to go apply for the recovery resources, they don't have access to the internet. And if they do, it costs a lot of money. So we need to look at all of those different factors, much like what we talked about childcare. Internet access is one of them. Computer access. All our kids worked from home or did their homeschooling. And so when they did that, did they have the computers to work from? Yes, some of them did, but the lower income people might not have. So we have to consider all of those different aspects.
And Courtney, before we move on, we want to remind everyone watching on Facebook to please send in your questions. This is called Engage. So we want to engage with you all and find out what you'd like to know from our panelists this morning. Just fill in that question in the comments section and we'll get them to our panelists. Courtney.
Thank you, Judy. And we do have a question from Kayla Alexandria. Kayla says, there's a lot of ARPA money coming through both city and county. How can we support long-term quality of life outcomes with one-time / short-term funding? Who would like to take that?
I'll take that one.
Laura?
There are two big funding. First of all, these decisions are being made right now. So this is important conversation. And I think it's important that the city invest a big chunk of this money into resolving homelessness in Austin. And that is on the table. We've requested $100 million. And then the second one is workforce development. And that's also before the city council. And I think that together those investments, one, help with quality of life, two, resolve a complicated issue that we have yet to resolve appropriately in this community, and then plan for the future.
Anybody else want to comment on that one?
I'm happy to add to that. Laura is correct. The timing is perfect. City Council is considering their framework for how they will allocate these funds at their council meeting tomorrow. So it's a discussion that we've been very engaged in since March, when these funds became apparent that they were coming down to us. One of the things that I think we can do, and we will do, council certainly leaning in that direction, is talk about how we can leverage these funds to be transformational. And Laura hit two of the main areas, our policy priority areas that we're looking at. I would add to that, council has asked us to consider early childhood education or childcare, as well as food and housing insecurity. So that's where the conversation is right now at the city. And I completely agree with Laura. This is a unique time when we have these funds accessible to us. And it's a great opportunity to really make some headway in these areas that will set us up for future long-term growth. I would add to that, the county also has received funds, and we are working closely with the county, talking about how we can leverage our funds together and how can we look at this more as a city and county response rather than as two separate and unique entities. We also are engaging that conversation with our smaller cities around in our region, and making sure that we're also communicating, talking about how, we might provide one area of relief in one space, but maybe we can offset with another entity in some way. So it's been a good discussion, and I'm excited about what the future has in store because of these funds.
Yeah, and if I can add one thing, everything that we go through has, in my opinion, has an opportunity at the end. So we're at the right time where there is an opportunity for people in Austin. And what I mean by that is upskilling, as an example that Laura mentioned. Well, it's a perfect opportunity to go get these funds and change jobs or get better jobs or get better skills. I mean, this is the perfect time to do that with the money that's being given to us from the city. So why not? And then that betters the quality of life in the long run.
Let's broaden the lens now and talk about the state as a whole. If you all are comfortable talking about Texas, our Texas. According to richstatepoorState.org, Texas is ranked number 9 in the United States for economic outlook, number 1 for economic performance. And then we all know the Austin area's economy is pretty darn healthy too. Talk about why you think Texas has fared better than most other states economically. And do you think those rosy numbers actually reflect any type of closing in the equity gap that has been so glaringly evident during the last 15 months? Laura, I'm going to let you start with that one. Oh, I think, Laura, are you frozen?
Veronica, you unmuted yourself, so go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Veronica.
If you're frozen, I'm happy to jump in.
Okay.
So I think you hit the nail on the head. My biggest concern as our economic development director is the growing gap in equity. And yes, we are doing well as a state. We're doing well, certainly as a city. Laura mentioned that we've had more employers still locate during a pandemic here in Austin. And when I talk to my peers across the country, we're the envy of the country because we're coming out of this pandemic very strong, even though we've had a lot of pain as a city. So overall, it's looking good. My concern is affordability. My concern is that what makes Austin the great place it is the creative community, the restaurants, these small businesses that we have here. And if we become a city where people who work and live in the city and work in these places can't live in the city, that's a concern. So I really think this is the time that we need to be serious and thoughtful about what does that look like long term? How do we prevent ourselves from becoming a city where we can't cultivate that creative community that's so important to our community?
Ahmed, chime
Yes.
in on that one as well, if you would, because I think those affordability issues and those equity gaps have really been, as we said, magnified during the past 15 months.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think Veronica was dead on. And the key aspect that I see that we need to address is affordability. I saw one statistic earlier last month, which was that home prices have gone up 36% in the last 4 months. I mean, that's astronomical in my opinion, right? And we've all seen prices of homes triple in the last 4 or 5 years. We're doing something right, obviously, as a city, and we're bringing in these different large organizations into the city, and that's fantastic. And that's giving us job growth, and it's giving us a lot more people. But at the end of the day, it also adds simple economics, right? Which is demand and supply. There isn't enough supply for homes, and therefore the price goes up. I mean, there's got to be some correlation, but we need to somehow control those costs. We need to have affordability. A lot of people won't be able to afford these homes and other things that we're talking about. I talked about internet access earlier. They're all correlated. And so how do we address all of those at the same time? Childcare, as an example, I'm sure the prices have gone up. I don't have a child in childcare, but a lot of people do. So prices would have gone up. And if that's the case, how do we address that? How do we maintain lower prices for all of these different aspects where people can still afford them?
I want to read a comment that complements what you just shared, Ahmed. It's from Kayla. I think the county is reticent to heavily co-invest as requested by the city in central Austin, where homelessness is most dense, because the county needs to support county-wide. Would anybody like to comment on that, or just?
I will. I think I've done everything but crawl into the Wi-Fi closet here at the office. I think I'm as close to the Wi-Fi as I can get without becoming one with it. So I just living the dream. I want to go back to this conversation and try to connect Kayla's comment to where we're headed with this affordability conversation and resilience. One, I think it's really important to note that we really do have a resilient economy in Austin, and it has been tested over and over again. We've had flood tests, we've had electricity tests, we've had drought tests, we had a pandemic test. And I'll tell you why it's resilient. It's because it's diversified economy. So 5 years ago, before the medical school, we didn't have a life sciences sector, and we do now. Tesla is giving us a new sector of automobile and manufacturing. We've got, with Army Futures Command, we have a whole military sector in Austin that not very many people know about, but it's huge. So we have new sectors in Austin, and that is the reason why we are resilient right now. And so I think that we need to lean into that. We need to be smart about how we're growing jobs in the economy. And I think we have been. I think we need to be careful that when we are problem solving around things like affordability, first of all, we're not the only ones. If you look across this country, specifically with housing is a problem for everyone. And so we need to not.
She was on a roll, the Zoom world. It's all good.
Right. And so the affordability challenge is not just income.
Thank you for that, Laura. Judy, you want to go on to the next question?
Sure. Let's. I think we have a question from an audience member, so I'm gonna go with that one. This is from Juju Rich. We are a nonprofit working in Title I schools, in after school and summer camp programs. How do we access some of this funding? Veronica, that sounds like something that might be up your alley. How do groups, some of these nonprofits working with children, access city funds that might be available?
Sure. So we're at a point right now where we don't have any active programs. We concluded, as I mentioned on the front end, we had 12 programs that we administered this past year and a half. Once the decision is made on how the ARP funds are allocated, there potentially could be that opportunity. And what I would love to do is get Juju's contact information, and I can have somebody from the economic development team reach out and talk specifically about what might be a good fit for her or the entity they're representing.
We'll make sure we connect you guys. I know that there's some big decisions going to be made very soon, and some this week that will decide how, some of this money is earmarked and who's getting what, and it's such an important thing going on in our situation right now, because there are so many people in need. And we forget, I think, that when the economy is booming as it is right now, sometimes we forget about the folks that have fallen through the cracks. Courtney?
Yeah. So we've been talking a lot about the city of Austin, but I have a text question. How do you think we're doing when it comes to working together more regionally on these economic issues? Who would like to go with that?
I can start. I do think that there's opportunity there. I think that we've started down that path, as I'd mentioned, where we really on the, I think what folks often see is what is happening at the elected side. On the administrative side, we really do have a good relationship with Travis County. We're growing that. So we get that this needs to be a regional approach across the board. One of the things I had wanted to do, and the pandemic kind of kicked it into gear, was to just start hosting those meetings that we have with the different cities and the different counties in our region. So I do think that there's room where we could grow. I know we at the city, for example, Tesla coming into our community, that is not in the city of Austin city limits, but we see that as a win for our region. And I think that we really need to think like that we are a region, and what is good for our sister cities in our area is good for us as the city of Austin, and vice versa. So I do think that that is an approach that we need to take.
And Courtney, I also think it's a really good conversation about in what areas must we work together as a region. I think sometimes this conversation becomes a little bit of all things to all people. I think we have to work together on infrastructure. I think we have to work together on education. I think we have to work together on economic development. And I think we've got a pretty good track record in all of those three areas. I think there are some issues that end up being unique to the communities because of their personalities. For example, homelessness is a really, really, really big issue in Austin. I don't know that it's as big of an issue in areas outside of Austin. And so it's okay. There are going to be some issues that are unique to the communities. But the 3 or 4 areas that we have to do together, we should just focus on those areas.
Laura, while I have you out and you're working okay, technically, can you pull back the curtain a little bit? I'm wondering what collaboration does take place from a chamber perspective with Hays County, with Williamson County, because some of these issues are very regional. As you said, homelessness may not be, but some of the other areas, the infrastructure, education, healthcare. So what collaboration goes on between the chambers and possibly maybe Veronica could talk about the cities comparing notes, and because we are all in this together.
Yeah, well, so several examples. Opportunity Austin, which is our economic development program, is regional. And so when companies reach out to us or anyone in Central Texas about potentially locating here, we all work together to identify what's the best fit. And we do it, everybody tries to set their love of their community aside and just figure out where best would this company go. So that is truly regional work. Infrastructure, I think, has gotten ever more regional in Central Texas. We work a lot on things like, roads, I-35, that was regional, to a large, and it will grow extent. Project Connect is regional. The work that we do on airport and getting more direct flights, which is a big deal for our economic development, that's regional work. The work that we do in the school,
Amada, why don't you chime in?
Yeah, I was just going to add that it's very important to communicate with each other, whether it's within the same region or other regions, and just learn from each other, just piggyback off of each other's knowledge, and try to do a better job. So we, as the Austin Asian Chamber, we work with and communicate with the Dallas Asian Chamber, the Houston Asian Chamber. There are other organizations like ACHI and NAAO and API. So there are lots of different organizations that we work with and try to learn from, and vice versa. But it's important to have that dialogue to understand where we are, what needs to be addressed, and how can we address it.
Thank you.
Great. And Veronica, do you want to add to that about how the city coordinates with other communities in our region?
I don't have much to add. I will point out to Laura's point about the Chamber and Opportunity Austin really taking that lead of looking at regionally, how do we work with businesses? It's interesting as we've done that work, it works together much easier than people might think. As we're approaching businesses, or even as we're reaching out to businesses who have headquarters in other parts of our country, but an office in the region, they really are looking for the best fit for them. And it's not as competitive as one might think. It's more of a, we need large warehouse space, and that's more in the outer areas of Austin, but we want the benefits of our employees having what Austin has to offer. So it really is a partnership and a collaborative approach in that regard.
Great, thank you all.
Thank you. Do you see San Antonio being a big partner? Anyone? No.
We don't do very much from an Asian Chamber perspective. We haven't done really a lot with any organizations in San Antonio. That doesn't mean that they don't exist, and that doesn't mean they don't have the same issues as we do. But at the same time, we just, for whatever reason, haven't had that interaction. But with some of the other bigger cities, we definitely have had.
and I would say it's growing.
Yes.
What about Samsung? What is the latest on that, Laura? The Samsung expansion. Do we have any update, or Veronica?
Well, what we know is they're still trying to make a decision about where their next site will be. And when they make that decision, it's going to be the fast track of fast tracks of all time to get that facility built, because of the delay in chips and the chip shortage. So once they make that decision, hopefully it will be Austin, and we're gonna watch a Tesla-like speed race for getting that facility built.
And that part of Travis County is booming right now. If folks have not been out to that section, Northeast Travis County, it is like a whole new economic development area, with around Tesla, all those new neighborhoods, and it is kind of exciting to see the growth in that area.
Mm-hmm.
If I could go back to the San Antonio question, and full disclosure, I'm from San Antonio, so I'm a little biased, but one of the things that I love about Austin is we're right in the center of Texas. So we have the ability for our business community to grow into other areas. San Antonio is obviously our closest neighbors, but I also think that there's work to be done in looking at things like the way our airports have operated. Austin's airport was very intentional in knowing that San Antonio really had a strong Central America drive and pull and recruitment of flights. And so Austin thoughtfully then said, okay, well, we'll go north. And so we really focused on Europe and other areas. And that kind of being thoughtful about our region in that sense and really working to the assets that we have in our unique communities, I think is important and really helps us grow as an overall state and region.
For that, I want to go back to the Tesla and Samsung conversation. So yes, we're experiencing a lot of economic development and a lot of noise around this. Can we talk about ways that we as a community can be mindful when it comes to inadvertent harm that can happen as a result of these fast developments? Or do you agree with that at all?
Courtney, elaborate on what you mean by unintended harm.
So, like when we have a lot of people coming in for these jobs, these opportunities, sometimes communities get displaced and things like that start to happen. As a result, how can we balance as we're experiencing this economic increase in development from this major entity moving into Austin, but also be mindful of the community members and groups that may not even have access to this,
It goes back to the affordability issues, right, Courtney? In that the, for example, the housing prices out in the Manor area are starting to boom. And so what does that mean for property taxes for the folks who've been calling that area home because it's affordable for a long time?
That balance is very important. One of the things that the city of Austin has done in looking at when we even consider economic incentives, which we, as when we're talking about economic incentives, people often think that every business that's coming is receiving incentives, and that's not the case. We only have 10 active agreements. But as a part of that process, we as a city have said, these are our community values, and you as a business must ascribe to these in order to even start having that conversation. So things like paid sick leave, parental leave, different elements, contracting with minority and women-owned businesses, those are part of the baseline of what we look at. But then it goes back to that displacement discussion. And it is an area where we're really leaning in to see what tools can we put in place to assist with anti-displacement. And we're working closely with our housing and planning department in that. We've had a conversation about this is not just a housing issue. This is an economic development issue. And how can we partner together? And then we, talking about the growth east, one of the things that economic development is also engaged in that Tesla area a little further north is a neighborhood called Colony Park that has been an important neighborhood for us as a city for a long term. And we're really working hard to look at a master plan for the Colony Park community that does not change the community, but makes it a better place for the people that have lived there for 50, 60 years to continue to raise their families and continue to grow their families in that community. So I think it's important for us to look at as a city when we're talking about redevelopment, when we're talking about development, and making sure that we are providing a high quality of life for people that have been in these communities for decades.
I want to switch gears just for a moment and talk about consumer trends. We touched on this a little bit, but as people who are overseeing the economy in Austin and looking for trends and seeing different businesses thrive and other businesses not, what do you see as some of the trends that have come about economically during the past 14, 15 months? And do you see some of those trends sticking around? Laura, I'm going to send that one over to you.
Yeah, let's see how this works. Yeah, well, we've seen a lot of trends, right? I mean, certainly you can watch all the delivery trucks up and down the streets. People are making a lot of their retail purchases online in ways that they weren't doing pre-pandemic. They're getting food delivered and they're working remotely. Access is going to be here for a long time. Telemedicine. To continue telemedicine. And if you've been to the doctor lately, they're all for it. And so I think we should look hard in our healthcare systems because there's a real opportunity to solve for access by using technology. I think that we're just going to see a forever changed environment in how people get goods. So I think we've learned a lot.
Veronica, Amen.
I was just going to add the word pivot in there. I mean, I think as a community, we have pivoted in basically what was given to us. And so we've pivoted because of that. And I think it's a fantastic thing. Just like Laura was mentioning, you see all these delivery trucks, but a lot of people, the consumer buying behavior has drastically changed, where whether it's telemedicine or teleoptometrics or food, essentially ordering food online. I mean, all of that has changed our behavior, and it's all for the good. Some people might not think that it's to the best, but I think it's given us an additional channel or avenue that we hadn't explored as deeply before.
So I was gonna, along those lines, I was gonna add that our small business community really did show their resiliency. It was impressive, and they did have to pivot, and technology advanced. Our small business community thought differently. One of my favorite examples early on in the pandemic, Joe's Bakery started selling one of well, I shouldn't call favorites, but great Mexican food in Austin.
Yes.
They immediately went to selling masa balls, so you can make homemade tortillas at home. And it was that kind of creativity that was brilliant. And I think a lot of that will transfer in. I think that technology that small businesses invested in will benefit them in the long term. So that you can still now order online from businesses that you couldn't order online from previously and have easy access to their goods. It also amplified their business by having technology at their side. They were able to sell their product not only to Austinites, but to the beyond globally. And I think that will also carry into post-pandemic reality.
One other
trends, yeah.
One other area that we didn't touch on that we should is education. Could this allow us to get cheaper, easier access to 2-year and 4-year degrees? I think that there were some real upsides, but also some real downsides to how remote learning worked. But it could be a big piece of a solution to affordability for post high school education.
Thank you for that. So normally we close with a call to action, but I would actually like to close with a question from our audience member, because I think it's perfect. This question comes from Keith Lewis. Many people lost trust in our infrastructure and government during the snow/ice storm, taking actions to not depend upon the grid, buying generators, etc. How does our city rebuild that trust? What are we doing to make that happen? So thinking about trust, how can we rebuild trust? Who would like to start?
I'll start so that Veronica can breathe on this one for a second. Well, that's sort of a big comment. And so I think we have to break it down. I think that we need to be thinking about resilience in a very specific way. And we need to understand that all of our systems are going to get challenged. They're going to get challenged by a pandemic, a drought, a storm. So that's not going away. And the key is you have to learn every single time where your weakness for resilience existed. And that is the takeaway from disruption. It isn't that you're not going to experience it, it's that you have to learn from it. So in that area, I say we need to be learners, and we need to do fair critiques, right? That's okay too. Trust in general, I think, is built when people engage and work together. And I think that we have gotten into some bad habits about relying on and depending on and making sure that the city is the sort of the sole definer of what the problems and solutions are. And because this is Leadership Austin, I will say it to this group. I think it's a challenge for all of us to figure out how we can design more community-based solutions and spend less of our time finger pointing and more of our time rolling up our sleeves and really engaging in collaboration, in community about some of the most intractable problems that we have in our community. And I just don't think that, I think we've passed the point where government design solutions are 100% going to be effective. I just think we've passed that point in time.
Matt, I see you're nodding.
Yeah, I agree. These things are going to happen to us. We just need to understand how resilient we are, just like Laura said, and how we can recover faster and better in the future. So, having generators is one way, but that doesn't displace the trust that we have in our government, in our city, and so forth. And again, those things will happen, but if there is strong communication, much like what happened at the end of the storm, we were getting constant communication from Austin Energy saying, okay, there's going to be an outage in the next 2 hours or 4 hours. That type of communication is very important. It will happen, but how do we recover from it is important.
So if I could just add to that, I do think as a government, as a city, trust is key and it's important. And it's like with anything else, it's very hard to build and it's very easy to lose. So I think part of what's important now is that we're working on rebuilding that trust. I also think that goes to the city working with the state and other communities in our state and really building that plan for resiliency. And we are actively as a city looking back and doing a hard self-assessment and lessons learned on what can be better. So it's not lost on the city. I think it's an important next steps, and we're certainly going down that path.
Great perspective from all of you today on our recovery in the long haul and our resilience as a region and as a city. We want to say thank you from the bottom of our heart for your insight today on these issues and for the work that you do in the community each and every day. Laura Huffman, and we have Ahmad Maladina and Veronica Brasenia. We so much appreciate your time this morning. And we also want to thank everybody for watching today. Courtney, this is our final Engage of the entire season.
Yeah, so yay.
Well, we appreciate everybody being part of these discussions for the past 10 months. We've covered a great variety of issues, and we hope it's been beneficial to the community. We do want to remind everyone that we'll be starting this up again in the fall. We hope you'll join us then. And in the meantime, we want to wish everyone a wonderful summer and make it a great day today.